So we've got some incoming Zombicide Invader tactics. We're looking at the checklist. We're building some options with this dynamic game. Independent of the mission, there are certain decisions to be made, depending on if it's the start of the game, mid-game, or end-game, and this is going to influence the overall objectives and win conditions. And in this vlog, Tactica, we're going to look at the search deck and how to implement it and how to play those odds. You might be conservative, or you might be like myself and push your luck. It is Zombicide Invader, even when possibly you should know better. Now, overall, just to lay some framework, Invader is interesting in that at the start of the game, once we get out of the tutorial missions that have very small maps, those small maps, the 6+ actors in the game, the characters, you can kind of be everywhere and cover everything. But as you move out of the tutorials into the main missions, what you begin to see is that the maps get larger, there are multiple spawn points, and potentially there are multiple independent mold zones. So you can't be everywhere at once, and you want to move as a team. So what happens is the pace of the game begins at the beginning, where you have all your miniatures laid out, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of aliens. We're not going to use them all. Then by the end of the game, the whole board is flooded. So as the game progresses and the spawn points on the farthest side of the board start pushing out more and more tanks, hunters, workers, seekers, abominations, all this stuff, the wave gets more complex. It becomes harder and more challenging, even if you have good weapons to kind of thin those numbers or ways to move very, very fast. The pace of the game, essentially, you're at a timer. At the beginning of the game, not a lot. At the end of the game, a lot more in terms of miniatures on the table. What this means is searching at the beginning of the game is vital, is important, because you have a lot of breathing room to maneuver and make decisions. So the first 2 or 3 turns, if you're a civilian or a soldier, you're going to search. Now, if we look at the search deck, if it's the core game, if you put in the expansions, whatever that deck is, at the beginning of the deck, there's no dilution with it. Everything is in there. Canisters, energy cells, weapons, spawn certain monsters on mold, whether it's tanks or workers. That deck, in theory, as you draw it out and you get more equipped as you move through the middle and the end of the game, there reaches a point where you really don't want to search anymore. So you have to know when things are good enough. And this came up in a recent game where we were playing. We had a character with the flamethrower. They had a canister. They expended the canister. 2 other characters had canisters. They got the flamethrower canisters to the person with the flamethrower. So we're just shake and bake everything. And there was a slight lull. We had cleaned out some rooms. We took out an abomination. We were making our way. And the question was, as a team talking, do we continue to search? And this is an illustrated point where at that point we were more than halfway through the search deck, and we had already expended a number of canisters. So the odds of drawing the canister of what we need, and everyone else had good enough weapons. We had sniper rifles, we had prototype weapons with energy cells. There was no real need to continue searching. But to search the deck and draw another canister when we had expended a number from the deck, that wasn't the most optimal thing to do, because it could be a canister, it could be an MRE, or it could be a spawn on mold. And the spawn on mold at the beginning of the game, you draw that, spawn a worker, draw another search card. At the beginning of the game, the mold points, there's 1, 2, 3, depending on the mission. As the game progresses, right, again, moving into the end, you've had a couple of abominations come on, and there's mold all over. There's kind of mold chains. If you get a spawn, that could be 5, 6, 7 miniatures, and especially endgame, you spawn if you run out of miniatures, which happens, that's an abomination spawn automatically or an abomination activation. So we actually see at the end game, this timer, the abominations actually move much, much faster, especially if you're playing and incorporating other abominations from the expansions. So there reaches a point based on the deck, when it gets to about halfway, you should already be geared up. And even if you've cleared an area and you're secure, it might not be worth the search. it might not be worth the search. So knowing when to search at the beginning and then knowing at some point where it's good enough. We just better leave it because there could be a couple of random mold spawns and we don't want to pull those out of the deck.